the Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Today's edition of the Spot Track Podcast is presented by Authentic Audio Productions. Take your podcast to the next level with professional tools and services, custom content creation, and even show hosting if that's something you require or might be thinking about in the near future. Visit AuthenticAudioPro.com. My name is Mike Ginnitti. Happy Juan Soto Day, the exact same day 1 year before that Shohei Ohtani joined the Los Angeles Dodgers on $700 million, $680 million deferred. It's quite a different story this time around. I've got a piece live on SpotTrack.com. I've got a plethora of tweets and posts and Instagram posts and the world now available on the internets, breaking down at least what we know. And what we know is this. From a surface level, 15 years, $765 million, none of it deferred. There's reportedly some escalators, maybe about 15 million built into this thing. There's an opt-out after 2029. The Mets can cancel that opt-out, or I should say his team can cancel that opt-out by adding $40 million more to the remaining 10 years. So it's 765 now. It can get to 780 with escalators based on reports. It can get to 820 if they buy out the opt-out or buy back the opt-out. And that's where we stand. There's a lot to get to here. We don't have the salary breakdown as of yet. We do have a signing bonus, $75 million. That's by far the most in Major League Baseball history. You're going to hear and read a heck of a lot of most in Major League Baseball history surrounding this thing, as we expected. It would be wrong. It was wrong to try to evaluate Juan Soto versus Shohei Ohtani. And the only reason anybody did that is because Ohtani's number existed. Okay? But other than that, there's no putting the two together and comparing apples to oranges. Can't do it. Ohtani's his own unicorn. And for his own right, Juan Soto was his version of a unicorn because of the age, plus the production, plus the ability for teams to just drop players like this into a lineup and then have immediate impactful success like the Yankees did. When you have 85% of an assembled World Series roster, like I think many of us thought the Yankees had, and you acquire a player like Juan Soto in February or January, whatever it was last year, it has the potential to just be that final puzzle piece. And it damn near was. And the Dodgers super team, I think that's fair to say, was the only thing standing in the way of a Yankees World Series in 2024. Now, the Mets aren't exactly that, right? The Mets don't exactly have 85% of a roster ready to go. Let's just drop Juan Soto into the number 2 hole behind Frankie Lindor and see if this thing works. It very well might out of the gate. All right. And Soto has made success wherever he's been. He has won a World Series with the Nationals after losing Bryce Harper, if you remember that. He has certainly risen the San Diego Padres into a different level, but they've added multiple pieces to do that. So Soto's impact was maybe clouded a bit, and quite frankly, I'm not sure that he got the best version of Juan Soto in San Diego, and that was evident by his kind of quick trade out. And obviously, the Soto and Aaron Judge combination was historic, literally historic. So all those things combined, right? His winning pedigree, the production across the board, both power and efficiency, the age, just turned 26 about 3 weeks ago, and his ability to raise championships teams into a higher level, into another tier, and especially having done that right before hitting the open market with the Yankees. This is where we get. Okay, there were 4 teams heavily involved. You can add the Dodgers as the 5th, though it doesn't appear as though they got to the 700 mark. But the Red Sox did, and the Blue Jays did. And the Yankees, in order to retain him, offered 16 years, $760 million. And there's so many people focused on, well, that's only 47.5 per year, and that doesn't do it justice. What are we talking about? Okay. They missed this thing by $5 million. And then we can talk about the opt-out and the extra $40 million and the escalators. Scott Boras went all in on this thing because he was able to, because 4 gigantic marketed teams, Boston, Toronto, New York, were willing to go all in. When you got that kind of feedback, you don't just say, all right, well, we'll take that. Seems like a nice offer. We'll settle in with that, Yankees. You got to go to the max. And the Mets went to the max. And Steve Cohen told us out loud on social media and in front of a microphone, he will not be outbid for Juan Soto. So it's time to just start listening, okay? Because the offers that the Passons and the Heymans of the world were telling us for the past couple of weeks were actually legitimate offers. Scott Boras was negotiating this thing out loud in public on social media via those reporters because he could, because there was no screwing this up, because it was simply, let's just make sure everybody in the world knows this, because maybe the Dodgers want to come in the back end like they did with Ohtani, like they did with Freeman. They didn't end up getting there, but every little thing, every little next up, right? Every little rung up the ladder that Toronto went and Boston went and the Yankees went. Boras knew Cohen was going to end up matching and then surpassing. So the Yankees got to 760, regardless of the fact that it was 16 years. Okay. And the Mets simply said, we'll go 15 at 5 more. We'll throw in the buyback to make it an additional 40. And then there's some sort of probably MVP postseason, all MLB and escalators built into this thing that can, at least how I'm interpreting it, take this thing to $820 million at the end of the day. And it's not deferred. And he gets $75 million upfront that doesn't apply to state income tax in New York State or city income tax in New York City. Huge win. Okay. So that's the process. And you can say the Yankees didn't do enough. The Yankees did way more than they were ever going to plan on doing. All right. If you kind of read the timeline of the offers that were made, they ramped this thing up about $50 million from starting point to the last offer at 760. They did enough. It simply comes down to the fact that Steve Cohen was not going to lose this war. And he didn't. Okay. And Boras knew it and took advantage of it. And everything about this is grossly overmarketed, overpaid. And that's just what it was going to take. Because the only question, and Scott Allen, our co-founder here, asked this one this morning, and it's the right question. Because the only question is this: who the hell's next? Okay, we had Ohtani last year. We had Soto this year. We don't have a next at this level. We got a lot of next tier downs that teams are going to utilize and win some championships with. But if you think Skeens is getting any close to this conversation, you're wrong. If you think Gunnar Henderson is even in the ballpark, you're wrong. Now, Bobby Witt may have been, a candidate, but he signed a pre-arb extension. So we're going to have to wait 6-7 years before we even start to have this conversation. Ellie De La Cruz is only 22 years old. I don't think he's ready to pop at this, even close to this level. Okay. Because it's not just a guy who can mash the ball or, play decent enough defense. It's the walks. It's the on base. It's the OPS. It's all the old school stuff that just adds up to production and runs and WAR. I went back on the 7 years or the 6.5 years that Soto has been a baseball player at the major league level. Fangraphs has a pretty cool stat that we do a similar version of, where they basically take the amalgamism of salary, the production, and the WAR, put it all together and price point a player's actual production in a single year. There were 2 out of the 6.5 years where Juan Soto was a $51 million player. Now, you can say that's risky now that the Mets have him for 15 years at $51 million. But the fact that a player in 2 out of 7 times got to a value of $51 million when nobody in baseball was actually earning $51 million, I think that says enough. Now, there's no justification for a 15-year contract at $51 million in Major League Baseball. None. It's an overpay. It's never going to work out at the end of the day. But we're still in the mindset, because the rules don't exist, that if you need a guy and you have the money, you can just do crazy things to make sure that guy's wearing your jersey. And that was Steve Cohen's mindset. And that's why Juan Soto will suit up in the number 25 uniform for the New York Mets on April 1st. And it's that easy. I thought Toronto would be out a long time ago. They weren't. They went way above and beyond they have ever gone for a free agent. I think Boston's in the same conversation. They didn't try half this hard to keep Mookie Betts. Now, there was some internal stuff that Betts actually didn't want to be here, be in Boston. But this is as hard as we've seen any of these top teams work to ascertain a free agent. And that's what Soto has developed. That's the resume he put together. That's what happens when you can do what he can do and you hit the open market at 26 years old. So there's a couple of ways to talk about this. Look, the piece I have breaks down everything I know. Okay. The signing bonus rankings, the average salary rankings, the luxury tax rankings. From a Mets perspective, they now project to be about 252 on opening day against that luxury tax salary. That's about 11 over already. And there's pitchers and the first baseman and all sorts more to figure out from a Mets perspective. I don't think anybody's counting out Pete Alonso returning still. I know there's a Houston and a Chicago and a Boston conversation there, and rightfully so. But after having seen what Soto plus Judge was able to do in the 3 and 4 in the lineup, you've got to think that Steve Cohen is now thinking, how much better, more efficient can Pete Alonso be as a number 4 with Juan and Soto in front of him? You've got to be thinking that. And it's just money. And I know the numbers sound crazy and absurd and nuts, but we don't have $21 billion to deal with here. And that's what Steve Cohen has. So it's exciting times for baseball. You can sit here and say the game is broken. The financial system is a mess. You know, the A's or the Pirates aren't going to spend $50 million on their own. The Marlins certainly probably don't get to $50 million in terms of their active payroll in 2025 because of where they are in their contention window. There's no floor. There's no true cap. The Mets will be taxed to high heaven. They didn't defer it, so you can't give the Ohtani cheating method, I'm air quoting there, that they used an accounting trick to bring down his tax salary. They didn't. All right. They're going to take on a 51 against the 241 threshold for the next foreseeable future here. It is what it is. They went max, and they bent at every elbow that Scott Boras threw out there. And that's perfectly fine because they said out loud they were going to do this. And they brought a bunch of teams along with them. But again, the right question is, what's next? What's next for baseball? Because we're not going to see $300 million contracts really anytime soon. Okay? The next best contract offer I have on the table right now is Corbin Burns. And he barely gets to $200 million according to our projections. I thought Willy Adames had a chance with that $26 million valuation, but he did a 7-year deal. So that came out to about $182 to join the Giants last week. Great deal. Finally, the Giants get one of the bigger fish on the open market after swinging and missing for 3 or 4 off seasons. But I don't know that we have a $200 million contract left. And if I look forward, we're going to be hard pressed to get there. The trend of 20-something-year-olds coming into the league, making an immediate pop and getting into a contract has been growing and building, and rightfully so. All right, these guys shouldn't be living on $900,000 salaries for more than a couple of seasons. They just shouldn't. You know, no other sport makes that happen. NBA, it's a 3rd-year extension. NFL, it's a 3rd-year extension. NHL, there's basically a 3-year RFA extension system in place, even though that's heavily governed in terms of how high you can go. But for the most part, all the major sports inside of America, make you wait about 2 to 3 years before you can really, really cash in outside of that rookie wage scale. And baseball's just not like that. Now, you get significant raises inside of arbitration. Obviously we saw that with Soto, who made an obscene amount of money over the course of his arbitration process. 71.1 million to be specific over the 3 arbitration years for Juan Soto. But this is what we get to. You're seeing less and less players go through all 6 years of control, get to the free agent market, and hope that this exact perfect storm hits where you have done enough and you peaked right at the finish line to be able to cash in like Soto has done. Now, Judge did it. Freeman did it, right? MVP season with the Braves, cashed in big with the Dodgers. Outside of that, we're seeing guys either sign early, more and more, of course, or demand/maneuver themselves a trade to a team that they could see themselves with long term and extend themselves there, right? Lindor, Betts, we've seen that now a few times with these major contracts. But free agency as a whole could really draw back now that this Soto contract is done, all right? And it's just a weird reality, maybe a positive reality, because I'm not naive to the fact that this stuff has been broken for 40 years, all right? The Pujols contracts and the Jason Hayward contracts and the Chris Davis contracts, it's flashy, it's marketable, it's cool to talk about, right? It's cool to write about. It's not great. It's terrible business, all right? It's just not how anything should. There's going to be a point in time, regardless of what team he's on, where Juan Soto is making $51 million and either can't stay on the field or is a DH 100% of his life or is playing first base but can barely move. It's just the same old story we've seen over and over again with these guys. Okay, and the reality is the Mets signed this contract in terms of the opt-out are just looking for 5 amazing years and hopefully 1 or 2 World Series. But none of that's guaranteed. So a third of this contract is really the meat and potatoes. Now, Soto's only going to be 31 years old when he can opt out in 2029. Okay. So this is one of those scenarios where it's going to be an interesting situation. And that's that's the only other point I want to focus on here with Soto before we move on. And obviously when we have the full boat details and the salary breakdown and all that, we'll come back and give that justice. But the opt-out is interesting. Number one, because they kind of ripped this off of the Yankees, right? The Garrett Cole situation. He had this ability to opt out in the middle of the contract, but the Yankees could buy it back with $36 million tacked onto the back end of it. And that just happened a month ago, not even. And for whatever reason, we haven't heard, and I hope this Soto decision doesn't impact this further. Cole did opt out. I think he tested the waters a little bit, didn't love what he saw, and then just decided to go back to the Yankees and say, let's just cancel this whole thing. Okay, you don't owe me an extra $36 million. Let's just pretend like I never opted out. Let's just keep this contract as it is. And then there were some rumblings that the two sides were working on a restructured extension to kind of make everybody happy in the end. I sure hope we get there. Because if the Yankees feel like not getting Soto back changes everything, okay, and they may go down to like, let's start acquiring prospects, and it's a very un-Yankees-like thing. But there's a world where Garrett Cole hates everything that just happened over the past 24 hours. Okay. There's a world where there's plenty of money now for him, but is this where he wants to be? Okay. Because the next 4 years may look a little bit different with Torres leaving, Soto not returning, a couple of the pitchers already off the roster. We'll see. There's some Yankees backlash here. Anyway, Soto gets an opt-out after 5 years. So after 2029, before the 2030 season, again, he'll be 30, going on 31 at that point. There's 10 years remaining. Now, if I'm doing the quick math, the reports say that those first 5 years come with $295 million. All right. That's a $75 million signing bonus and $220 in salary, which means there's 10 for $470 remaining after that opt-out. So to add 40 to that, we're actually talking about 10 for $510. The Mets can just say, here's $40 million more. It's going to be 5-10 for the next 10 years, and you're going to stick with us indefinitely. But that's not a guarantee, because everything could be changed. Everything will be changed in the matter of 5 years. It's just, we don't see decade-long tenures with anything anymore in baseball, even though the contracts still look like decade and a half long. So what's fascinating to me is the Mets could aggressively spend, really aggressively spend for the next 5 seasons with Juan Soto, having paid him $295 for those 5 seasons, which is just under $60 million a year, $59 a year. Try to win as much as humanly possible. And then, assuming Soto is still even 90% of Soto at 30 years old, he's going to opt out, right? Because you're going to try to bag the extra 40 mil. It's not a guarantee that the Mets say sure. All right. He could be hitting the open market again at 30. And I don't think anybody would complain with that. Not Soto, not Boris, and obviously not the Mets if they're allowing it to happen. So what seems like the Mets got fleeced, and by the way, they did, okay, for all the reasons we talked about in the intro. They did, on purpose. There's a world where this is 5 years at $59 million per year, 5 for $295, and then they say, wipe their hands clean, go get paid somewhere else, Juan. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully we got a World Series, to show for it. And if not, they just don't have to continue on with those 10 years at $510 million. They just don't have to. So it's great. It's amazing for the player. It's short-term amazing for the Mets. And I think the only problem, maybe for both sides, would be if this thing actually gets to 15 years, all with one team, and Steve Cohen has to continually try to push this gas pedal down, 1,000 miles an hour. That's not plausible. All right. Not the richest person in the world is ever going to think about doing that for that long, even for 10 years. So it's interesting that there's a cutoff point at that age 30 mark, which seems phenomenal for the player, but could also very much benefit the Mets, who can wipe themselves clean of this, push that money into different resources, different assets, different areas of the roster, and make this a true 5-year push. That's my interpretation as armchair GM here of how I believe the Mets will operate. I think this is going to be the most aggressive 5-year push maybe in the history of Major League Baseball, because this guy said yes. That's how I'd be interpreting it. And I don't know why they would think otherwise. So, the Japanese pitcher, all the international signings that are available to them, certainly, trade pieces like Garrett Crochet and Devin Williams, and it's all the names we've heard out there before. Certainly bringing back Pete Alonso if that's still on the table. This is the big move the Mets made. Let's just see how this works out. There's probably eight more items on David Stern's list right now that need to be checked off before we even get to February, before we even get to pitchers and catchers reporting. And I don't blame them for it. This was step one in the process. They did everything above and beyond to make sure it happens. You just can't waste the next 5 years by saying, well, we spent a boatload on him. Let's just hope we can get value everywhere else. That's where most baseball teams make their mistake. And rightfully so, by the way. It's not my money, right? Everybody's got a price point. Everybody's got a threshold. I think Steve Cohen is just telling us out loud, I don't really have one right now. And if that's truly the point, then there's no reason to believe that the Mets are done or even close to being done. But this was obviously step number 1, 2, and 3, and that step has been completed. More to come on Soto as we find and uncover more and more details with that contract. But it is more and more historic than we ever thought it was going to be. It's the longest contract in baseball history. It's the largest total value contract in baseball history. It's the highest AAV, not named Shohei Ohtani, in baseball history. It's the largest luxury tax salary officially at $51 million in baseball history. Ohtani's got brought down to 46 and change because of the deferrals. It's the largest signing bonus. That's $75 million in baseball history. That's that. On to the next. Plenty of great players still to be signed and traded and extended, and we'll be following that as much as humanly possible. I hate to beat a dead horse from the football standpoint. But a couple things to get to here. Number one, Josh Allen's contract was restructured this offseason for 2024 purposes. I've said this a few times. It bears repeating. He's making $60 million cash this year. That's upwards of a third or fourth in the league behind a couple of guys that got massive signing bonuses. There's MVP incentives, which look phenomenal right now. You can get a $1.5 million bonus for that. He had a chance at an extra $2.5 million if the Bills were the number one seed. That seems to be slipping away after yesterday's loss, but plenty of time for that to come around still. And then there's some Super Bowl and AFC Championship stuff that we'll have to monitor as the Bills season projects. But for the most part, the Bills took some money from down the line, pulled it into 2024 and said, we get it. We know what's happening with the rest of the league right now. Let's just focus on this season, on 2024, and then what? And I just want to make sure that we all are aware that there's a then what coming. Because from a cash perspective, Josh Allen is only set to make $14.5 million next year. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's probably not going to work. Now, they can just do this again. Take money from 26, 27, 28, pull it into 2025 and go from there. But that's a lot easier, a lot harder when your starting point is $14.5 million. Okay, the Bills basically doubled up Josh Allen's 35 and change up to 60 with incentives. You're not going to add $50 million out of nowhere when you could just rip this thing up and start over. Now, I realize 4 years left. Most teams aren't even thinking about a redo, but he's going to be 29 years old as of next, 2025 season, regular season. It's probably the right time for the Bills, who are a year away from moving into a big, gigantic new stadium as well, right? That they have to uncover. They've purged some dead cap stuff. That was obviously a big talking point this past offseason. They're not in great cap shape going forward, but they can be. Okay, they can be. Josh's cap hit for 2025 is 43.2, which is certainly doable. And part of that is because they pulled some money forward and took some money out of 2025, obviously. But it's just a heads up that the season he's having, the compensation he's seeing because of the renegotiation, it's coming to a head. And not unlike the Soto stuff, right? He's probably walking himself into a position of maximum negotiation. Okay. The city is 100% head over heels for this guy. I can tell you that firsthand. Okay. He'll have a key to the city the second he hangs up the cleats. He is that guy right now in the league. And I don't think that's by any means a hot take. Okay. That's why he's a minus 450 to win the MVP. He's must-see TV. He makes the Bills must-see TV. That's easier said than done. He's elevating a set of weapons that are banged up, inefficient, or deficient, something Mahomes and the Bradys have done in their careers, of course. Mahomes continuing to do right now in 2024, by the way. He's checking all the boxes of a tier one, high-level, long-term franchise quarterback. There's no reason to screw around with this. You take the remaining 4 years of the contract, you wipe him clean. Now, there's some bonus proration that's got to transfer over, of course, and we'll talk about that when it gets to that point. But I am 100% of the mindset, without any inside knowledge, that the Bills and Josh Allen are going to come together for what I can imagine would have to be the most historic contract extension in NFL history, because how could it not be? Okay, he came into 2024 already on that track. And most of us, myself included, were prepared for a bit of a dial-back season for all the reasons we've already talked about and everybody's talked about. Okay, there was just a heck of a lot of, the captain on the offense and the captain on the defense were both removed this offseason. And plenty of secondary pieces were turned over, and they've been playing on fool's gold for quite a while here, and maybe that'll catch up to them at the end of the season, but not for now. And enough damage has been done in a positive light to assume now that Josh is going to sit down with the Buffalo Bills in February or in January and negotiate what has to be considered one of the biggest contracts ever. Because from just a valuation standpoint, he's a $62 million player. That's just stats. And certainly yesterday's stats did nothing but inflate that to the nth degree. So we're going to talk about Purdy. There's some other free agents we'll get to here in a second, but just be prepared for one of the bigger market resets we've had in sports on the heels of Juan Soto and the Mets here. It's coming. It's coming for the Bills, and they know it, and they are properly planning for it. I assure you that, because this is a well-run front office from A to Z, and it's just going to be the price you pay for having true greatness at your quarterback position in 2025. Speaking of, this Sam Darnold stuff is just so darn fun. It's just an absolute treat, because we kind of went through this with Rodgers and Love. We are actively going through this with Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix Jr., and I have to think that decision is getting harder and harder for the Falcons to make every week, because Cousins just doesn't appear to have it with inside of this offense. And that's kind of the point to make, right? There's something about this Vikings offense, and I give the coaching staff, the coordinators, all the credit in the world, okay? Because this is not new, okay? This was obviously Cousins for years, and Cousins looked peak Cousins inside of this offense. And certainly the weapons were excellent, and we kind of thought it was just an amalgam of good pieces, and the sum of the parts equals a great whole. And Cousins was maybe just maturing into a top level, tier B quarterback. Certainly that's what the Falcons were hoping, that he would just transfer that over, elevate their offense, and take them to become an actual winning process team. Not the case. And injuries, age, whatever it is. But I think this has to be part of the discussion. Okay, because it's not just Cousins. We saw Josh Dobbs go out of his freaking mind for 5 weeks in this offense. And now we've seen Sam Darnold, who, for all intents, is a backup in the league. Okay, could barely be a third stringer for the Jets. Didn't win the job in Carolina. Okay, Baker steamrolled that and took his own path back to big money in Tampa. But something changed when he went to San Francisco and did his duty out there. And he processed enough there to walk into this magical offense. And I wish more people with all 22 breakdown experience would run with this, because there's something happening inside of this offense that makes playing the quarterback position an absolute breeze. Now, Darnold's talented, okay? He's looking right now like he looked at USC when he had all the bells and whistles and amazing coaching, and certainly a scheme and a fit that worked for him. And for whatever reason, no other scheme and system and coach could do this math. But it's happening in Minnesota, which makes me so reluctant to just throw him to the open market like every report is saying. I get it, right? Darnold's going to take what Darnold's going to be asking for in just 2025, even if it's a franchise tag, $41 million, is more than J.J. McCarthy will have made over his full first 4 seasons, maybe even including the 5th-year option when we get there. Okay? It's just a reality. It's just how it is. I can tell you right now, without even having yesterday's stats in yet, because we're waiting for those to download and our algorithms to update. Before yesterday's ridiculous performance, 321, 5 touchdowns, a 159-ish rating, damn near perfect. He's already a near $35 million per year player. That's cap-adjusted Baker in Tampa. That's way north of cap-adjusted Geno Smith in Seattle, the other 2 reclamation projects we talk about all the time here. This is one of those Jimmy Garoppolo in San Francisco conversations. Okay, it just works. But at some point in time, the team just says, yeah, we just trust that we can throw the next guy in and not have to pay him $40 million. And I'm pretty sure that's still what's going to happen. And I get it. I just hate it for Darnold, because Darnold's going to be back out there trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And as we've seen 3 times, it just doesn't seem to work. Now, there's some opportunities, right? I think the Giants would listen. I think the Jets would listen. I don't know. That's weird, right? I think the Raiders are in. I think Tennessee might listen. But any of those teams, all of those teams could simply just say, we're just going to go back to the draft. Because even if Sam Darnold is a hit, we'd just rather spend $20 million to try to hit there than guarantee 140, 2.5 years of this contract to bring in Darnold. Now, maybe I'm reading this wrong. Okay. Maybe the read is that there isn't an actual team that wants to throw a multi-year guarantee at Sam Darnold because they know exactly what we've just said, which is he's in a lightning in a bottle scenario. And the second you remove him from that vacuum, he turns back into $4 million Sam Darnold. And we'll offer him 3 times that, but not 10. I hope that's not the case. Okay. I hope one of 2 things happens. He gets paid, even if it ends up being a disaster on the field, or he gets a contract with a team that allows him the ability to have incentives and escalators, and it just fits from a football standpoint. I want this guy to be playing football, and I'm worried that that's not going to be the case. I'm worried that this is going to turn into Blaine Gabbert or some situation where, man, there was a moment and then immediately it's gone. So it stinks. I don't blame the Vikings for what they're being reportedly doing, right? Which is just choosing to stick with the guy that they drafted, that they scouted, that they think can be all of this and maybe more. But if it's not, my goodness, okay? Because McCarthy's coming off the worst situation possible to start your career, right? I mean, it's like the Joel Embiid start. And there's already a guy now doing the job that McCarthy was drafted to do. Maybe even more. I'm not sure McCarthy has 400 yards in him. We'll see. So it's such a fascinating situation that this top 2, top 3 team in the conference is playing on house money with a $10 million quarterback and has absolutely no plans to keep him as their quarterback in 2025. Is there anything that Darnold can do to change that? That's the question I keep asking myself. Because if you think it's playing better and continuing to win, just remember that that's only going to make his price point higher, right? Like he's a $35 million player today, maybe even higher after these numbers get adjusted from an algorithm standpoint. What's it going to mean if he's an NFC championship loser to the Detroit Lions in a month from now? I don't know. We saw Garoppolo bank. Okay. Garoppolo made really nice coin with the Raiders after leaving San Francisco after a couple of NFC championship appearances. And I think Darnold is an entire tier ahead of Jimmy Garoppolo in terms of talent and skill and the ability to read progressions and move around in the pocket and things like that. So it's only going to take one team to come in at these numbers we're talking about. And there's a big part of me that hopes it's Minnesota. And even if that's just a 2-year guarantee and it turns into a Jordan Love situation, it's not good business, but it may be great for the football. And I know those are 2 competing situations within these organizations. And generally speaking, business wins almost always. So I'm assuming that's how this is going to end as well. But there has to be a point over the next 5, 6, 7 weeks, postseason included, where Sam Darnold just does enough to make everybody in the organization turn around and say, what the hell are we doing? This guy is our guy, and it's going to cost us an arm and a leg, and that's just too damn bad. We're just going to have to bite the bullet. And maybe we can get some of that value back for J.J. McCarthy, who's never played a snap, and maybe not. And maybe we're just going to have to eat the fact that we made this draft pick and fell ass backwards into a situation that we had to deal with. It's fascinating. But kudos to Darnold for the roller coaster and finally getting to a point where he is going downhill at 100 miles an hour with a truly fun, enjoyable offense to watch. It's a carbon copy conversation, but 10 years older for Russell Wilson, a player I've also talked about. I thought there was going to be a point of the 2024 season, maybe just about now, right? First week of December, where neither Justin Fields nor Russell Wilson were starting for Pittsburgh. Okay. That was like the worst case scenario in my head in August when all of this was coming together and some of the valuations were out there and the over-unders. And I couldn't have proven more wrong. And I think a lot of us could not have been proven more wrong. By just the total team turnaround that Mike Tomlin has been able to masterclass. And then the same goes for Russell, who did show, above average signs with Denver last year. And we think about the fallout and the Sean Payton stuff and how he had his own wing that he wanted to be private in, all that crap. We get it. But we do miss that Russ was pretty good at times last year for Denver and that there were some pieces in place and things like that. He just needed more adults in the room. Okay. And that's what Pittsburgh has and has always had, starting with the coaching staff. It's pretty awesome that this is working out for him because we're seeing another future Hall of Famer just, vanish into the abyss in Aaron Rodgers. I'm not sure he's going to win 4 games this year, and this might be his last final season. So good on Russ. Good on Pittsburgh. Pending free agent Russell Wilson, by the way. As we talked about last Thursday with Brandon, they got a lot of mouths to feed to keep that band together, and there's no chance that they're going to try to start this thing over right now. There's just not. Russ is the guy. It's just a matter of getting to a price point that works for everybody. And from Wilson's standpoint, a guy who's made $300 million in his career, you hope he bends a little bit and just makes this a smooth PR process, something he has not been good at. Let's put it that way. But like I said, there's more adults in the room now. So I'm hoping that all the parties at B come together, maybe are already coming together saying, look, this is definitely more than just a glitch. We got to make sure that this is smooth, even if it's just through 2025. They can still draft a guy that can still do all the things that you're supposed to do as an organization. But for right now, let's just move on and continue. If this is Kirk Cousins' finale, it's been rough. But I'm going to finish on a fun note. This guy's in my Hall of Fame. Okay. He's never going to the actual Hall of Fame, and that's okay. But this guy's in my Hall of Fame. He's fully guaranteed $27.5 million next year. Okay. If he's on a roster in the middle of March or early March, he'll get an extra 10 added to that in terms of a 2026 roster bonus. Let's just assume that happens because Atlanta's eaten some of this money to facilitate a trade because the Raiders screwed everything up and they need Kirk Cousins at the last second. Whatever it's going to be. Let's just assume he makes $37.5 million more going forward. That means Kirk Cousins and all that comes with him will have earned $331.5 million for his career. And that ain't bad work. All right. Especially for a 4th rounder, number 102 overall out of Michigan State, who got drafted with another quarterback, Robert Griffin Jr. III, in the same draft and had to compete from day one for any kind of playing time with that Washington team and only got it because RG3 got injured, unfortunately. And he wouldn't have got it without that. So from what was looking like a practice squad situation out of the gate, has now turned into most likely $331 million in the NFL. And that's partly him, partly timing, and really good agent work from Mike McCartney, his agent, who, garnered a guaranteed contract, double franchise tags, kind of used every element in the box this time throughout this 10 plus year career, 12 years now. I think he'll get one more. I know how bad it looks right now. I think he'll get one more. I mean, he's guaranteed another 27.5, even if they cut him today. So that's written in stone. But I do think he'll be on a team with an opportunity to play football or at least compete for that job in 2025. But it may not be Atlanta. I think that's getting clearer and clearer. It's moving in on Michael Penix Jr. time, and that's just perfectly fine. All right, we'll keep up with the Soto stuff. There's plenty of more baseball stuff to get to. Our bubble pieces are continuing to be published at Spotrac.com for the NFL as the calendar flips to December here. Lots of wide receivers to get to. I'm sure we'll talk about that Thursday with Brandon. For Scott Allen, my name is Mike Ginnitti. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Spotrac Podcast.